Good day, everybody. I hope that you will. I hope that you are well, and I also hope that you are having a good day so far. Today we'll be doing our grade 2 English lesson on adverbs. All right. So we're doing grade 2. And before we start, we're going to log on to aplusstudents.ca. Once we've logged on to aplusstudents.ca with our username as well as our password, and then we're going to select the subject of language arts, grade 2, and then we're going to scroll down up until we get to the chapter of adverbs. All right. So when it comes to adverbs, right? Firstly, before we continue, we are going to say that our chapter is adverbs. Our subject is English language arts. All right. So we're doing grade 2 English language arts. And the lessons that we're going to be focusing on under the chapter of adverbs is, does the adverb tell you how, when, or where? So does the adverb tell us how, when, or where? All right. So when it comes to adverbs, right? Adverb, it is a word that tells us more about the verb. So an adverb, it is a word that tells you more than a verb, more than an action or doing word. All right. So an adverb is a word that tells us more about a verb. Remember, the verb is an action, right? And when it comes to it telling us more about the verb, right? It will basically tell us how, it will tell us when, and it will tell us where. All right. So once again, we have an adverb. That is our chapter. And an adverb is a word that tells you more about the verb. We can even say it describes a verb. All right. So an adverb is a word that tells you more about the verb. We can even say it modifies the verb or describes the verb, right? And an adjective, it tells you how, when, or where. It tells you how, when, or where. So with some adverbs, right? Some adverbs they tell you how. And some adjectives, we say some adjectives they tell you how, right? And whenever we ask the question how, and then it means that that word it ends with an ly. So that adverb it usually ends with an ly. Usually, not always, but usually or may need ends with an ly, right? For example, if you ask the question, how does she run? If you ask the question, how does she run? Then if we were to ask how, because we're asking how, right? So they say if the adverb is how, it tells us it basically ends with an ly. So now if the question is how does she run? All right. So if we look at this word quickly, right? So quickly is an example of adjectives that tell us how, right? And we see that, remember, we see that an adjective, it ends in ly. So, for example, she runs quickly, you did something hurriedly, right? So, those are, for example, adverbs. Then we have adjectives that also tell us when, and we have adjectives that tell us where, right? All right. Then some of it will tell you when, right? When. So the question is like maybe when does he leave? When is the bus coming? When? So you're asking when. And a question and an answer is he leaves soon. Then we have adjectives that tells us where, right? So we said we have adjectives that tells us when. And adjectives that tells us when, it does not necessarily have to be, you know, tomorrow, Tuesday, when. No. When we ask the question when, right? Then it can either be soon. You can get an answer that is soon because it tells us when, right? Later because it tells us when, right? And we said some of the adverbs that tells us where. So for example, where do they play? All right. So if somebody asks you where, then it can be outside, inside, next door, on top, right? That is basically adjectives that tells us where, right? How and where. And adverbs, right? Once again, it is a word that tells us more about the verb, right? Remember, it tells us more about the verb, the action, the doing word. And it tells you how, it tells you when, and it tells you messy. All right. We are now going to aplusstudents.ca and then we're going to start with our tutorial lesson. And we're going to, does the adverb tell you how, when, or where? Does it tell us how, when, or where? Right? Remember we said that an adverb is a word that tells you more about the verb. All right, so we see that it is an adverb is a word that tells you more about the verb and it tells you how, when, or even where, right? And we made an example of where we said that the adverb tells us how, and they usually end in "al." Why? Because they're basically ending in "while." I'm telling how they're basically asking us how. So how does she run? And then she runs quickly, and the lead ly. Some adverbs they tell us when, right? So they tell us when. So now you ask yourself the question: when does he leave? When does he leave? And we can say he leaves soon. So words like soon, later, that is what you can add here. Then some adverbs tell us where. So where do they play? They need to play outside. So where? Outside. Where? Inside. Where? In the bedroom. Like you need to basically say where. And that questions is there to basically guide, right? But an adverb is a word that tells us more about the verb. It modifies the verb. It describes a verb. All right. Here it says, look at the adverb in bold, like early. Does it tell you where or does it tell you when? The sun sets early. Does it tell us where the sun has set or when? So if we look at the first question, it says the sun sets early. Early. We need to ask ourselves, does it tell us when the sun sets or does it tell us where the sun sets? Does it tell us when the sun sets or where the sun sets? The sun sets early. All right. So, yes, if we look at this one, then it tells us when. And they specifically tell us when because if they say the sun sets early, so all you do is you ask when, right? Early. All right. So, yes, we can say when. Now, if we look at the next one, right? It says, we waited there. We need to say if it is if it tells you when or if it tells you where. We waited there. If somebody says we waited there, are they basically telling you when they waited there or where they waited? All right. Remember, if we ask the questions either there, or we ask where or there. So we waited there. So if you look at that, where, what do we basically say? If we look at the word there, right? The word there tells us that the question was asked, where did you wait? So where and when, right? So we need to ask ourselves, where did you wait? I waited there. Where? There by the tree. Where? There by the red car. Where? I waited in the classroom. But you need to basically let people know where you are hiding. All right. Amy's friend fell down. So Amy's friend fell down. Yes. And if we look at this one that says Amy fell down, yeah, so with Amy fell down, we basically ask where, right? Where did Amy fall down? Is it the stairs? Is it by the chair? Is it by the door? Right? But Amy fell down. All right, so now let's go to our test. We are going to look at the adverbs in bold. Does it tell you either when or where? When or where? Ashley's dogs always barks. Ashley's dog always barks. So Ashley's dog always barks. So we now need to ask ourselves, right? Does it tell you when the dog always barks or where the dog always barks? We need to say, is it when or do we say where? Which one is the correct one? So Ashley's dog always barks, right? And if we choose the correct one, All right, then we say when does the dog bark? We can say the dog's always barks, right? Look at the adverb again in bold and tell us if you feel it's how or it is where. How or where. He sang well. So sang well. So he sang well. Do we now have to ask, does it tell you how or does it tell you where? How well? So he sang well. All right. So it says he sang well. So do we have to ask how he sings or where he sings? So he sang well. Do we need to say how he sang or do we say where he sang? And if we, for example, say he sang well, do we say how did he sing or where did he sing? Right? So when, for example, we said how, right? So we choose the first option, which tells us how he sang. So how did he sing? He sang very well. So sometimes when it comes to the how, then it doesn't necessarily just have to end with an ly, but it basically tells us how either someone has done an action. So the first option was correct. Ne? The first option was correct. Fred quietly reads. So Fred quietly reads. Does it tell us how he reads or does it tell us when he reads? So Fred quietly reads. All right, and if when we want to answer Fred quietly reads, then we can say, how does he read? He wants to be quiet. So how? Yes, so we'll go with the option one. So well done. The option one is correct. He waved sadly. He waved sadly. We need to say if it is how or is it where. He waved sadly. And when we say he waved sadly, then we can ask, how did he wave? So the question is how? And then we can say he waved sadly. So one, well done. Option one is correct. All right. Here it says, look at the adverb, right, in bold, which is tomorrow. Does it tell you when or does it tell you where? It says the science club meets tomorrow. Meets tomorrow. So the science lab meets tomorrow. So now we need to ask ourselves, is it when or is it where? And if we were to choose one of that, then we can say, if they say the science club meets tomorrow, right? Then we can ask ourselves option one, because now we're asking ourselves, when are they meeting, right? So when are they meeting? So well done. Option one is correct. All right. So now also when it comes to adverbs, right? We see that adverbs tells us more about the verb, right? And when it tells us more about the verb, and then adverbs can tell us how, it can tell us when, and it can tell us where. All right. Remember we said an adverb, it's a word that tells you more about the verb, it describes the verb. So it tells you how, when, or where, right? So now we're going to identify the adverb within a sentence. Ne? Yeah, it says the basketball bounced lightly. The basketball bounced lightly, right? All right. So we are now going to do our test, right? Where we are going to basically just be able to identify what an adverb is, right? Like, for example, here, if you say the basketball bounced lightly, right? So the basketball bounced lightly. So now you need to ask yourself, so bounced is our verb, right? But now remember, we need to get another word that tells us more about what really happened or how it happened. Then we can say it bounced lightly. So lightly is then our answer. So the basketball bounced lightly. When we have so lightly is the word that also ends in ly. So now you ask yourself, how did this basketball bounce? It bounced lightly, right? All right, now we're going to our test. We need to select the adverb that tells us about the verb in bold. When does Mr. Finley teach? So now, when does Mr. Finley teach? And it says Mr. Finley teaches today. So we now need to choose the adverb that tells us more about the verb in bold. So we need to ask, when does he teach? Is it today or is our adverb teaches? All right. So here it says, we will say, when does Mr. Finley teach? He teaches today. So the first option is correct. The first one. Remember, it is telling us about the verb. It's not the verb. It's telling us about the verb. So we need to select the adverb that tells us about the verb in bold. How are the kids playing? All right, so now it is, how are the kids playing? And the answer is, the kids are playing nicely. The kids are playing nicely. So now our adverb, is it the kids or is it nicely? It shows how the kids are playing, not the not the verb, but the adverb that tells us about the verb. And if we choose our adverb, no, like leave that one. Leave that option first. There's the leave that option that you had. Because remember, if you ask how are the kids playing, kids are not a verb, right? All right, so now we're like the kids are playing nicely. If we want to say how the kids are playing, then we can say nicely. Remember, it's the same as like kids playing, and some are fighting, some are being rough. But how are they playing? They're playing nicely. Nicely tell us how they are playing, right? Yes, lovely. Nicely is our answer. Well done. Where and how did Lisa's friend fall? And it says Lisa's friend fell down, right? So now we need to choose the correct option. Is it down or is it friend? Down or friend? All right, so we can say Lisa's friend, sorry, fell down. So how did it fall, or how did she fall, or he fall down? So well done. The first option is correct. Because remember, we are not identifying the verb. We're not identifying the subject or the noun. We're identifying the action that it's basically the word that tells us more about the verb. It tells us more about the verb. It is not the verb. My team finished early. Is early our adverb or team? Early or team? So my team finished early. Is it early or team? All right, so we can say early, right? And it tells us about how or when they finished. Well done, guys. Well done. All right, so this is now the end of our lesson on adverbs, right? Remember, adverbs, it tells us about the verb, right? It describes the verb, right? And with adverbs, it tells us how, when, or where something or someone is, it's happening, right? Remember, we don't identify, when it comes to adverbs, we don't identify the verb. You identify the adverb that tells us about the verb, right? All right, so this is the end of our lesson on adverbs. Thank you very much for joining the class. I really hope you're going to have a good day further. Goodbye. Goodbye.